Oops, Stop Accidentally Offending People, and it's presented by Shannon Jammal-Hollemans, Collaborative Program Developer for Faith Formation Ministries, Esteban Lugo, Director of Race Relations here at the CRCNA, Kate Kooyman, Coordinator for Restorative Justice from the Office of Social Justice, and Mark Stephenson, Director of Disability Concerns. And I've got Mark's microphone on now, and I'm just going to let him get his webcam turned on, and he's going to help introduce today's topic and our presenters. Mark, it's over to you. And Mark, your microphone has somehow gotten turned off.
How about that?
That's great.
Okay. Welcome to everybody. My name is Mark Stephenson. I'll do a bit more introduction of myself when it's my turn for the presentation. For now, I'd just like to do a little introduction to the whole webinar. You'll hear things today that you have said and done yourself, and we, the 5 of us who are present right now as presenters, we've said and done some of these things ourselves too. You can't assume that you will never again hurt someone with your words. We need to keep taking risks in order to be loving toward fellow brothers and sisters, including risking disagreement and controversy with one another. As we present, each of us with a list of 5, you might start to feel overwhelmed by the time that we're done. You might be tempted to say, oh man, I'll never remember all that, or even, oh, this is just being politically correct. But we ask that you please stick with us. We're doing this today because all of us need to understand that injustice happens day in and day out, and sometimes with our words. Sometimes we may stumble into words and behaviors that hurt others, even so-called little things, sometimes called microaggressions, that you didn't even know you were committing against other people. So each of us presenters will present some no-nos and some positive suggestions. So if a trigger warning is helpful to you, here it is. You're going to hear some offensive language today and some offensive phrases. And although what we are saying today represents the thoughts and feelings of a lot of people, we don't aim to speak for all people of color, all women, all people with disabilities, or all people facing social prejudice. These are our thoughts today, and to help all of us start some self-reflection and maybe even some healthy conversations. So listen for common themes in our presentations. Our hope and prayer is that you'll come away from our time together today with several new ideas for relating well in a loving manner with people who are different from yourself. After the 4 of us have presented our top 5 lists, we'll open it up for conversation. Our first presenter today is Shannon Jammal-Hollemans. Shannon, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Can you all hear me? All
You're
right.
on.
Thanks. I'm going to start by launching a poll. So Kim, if you would put that poll on the screen, that would be great. So the poll I have to start with is this. It's a true or false statement, and I'd like you to answer it to the best of your knowledge. So the number of people living in poverty in the United States and Canada has decreased over the last 15 years. Is that true or false? And it looks like most of the results are in, with 9 people answering false and 2 people answering true. That is false. According to the Conference Board of Canada, Canada's child poverty rate is 15% right now, which is up from 13% in the mid-90s. The statistics in the United States are similar, with 15% of our population living in poverty today, which is up more than 2% in the last decade. Rashida Washington, thanks Kim for that poll. Rashida Washington is the executive director of the Communities First Association, and she defines poverty as the experience of lack in a world of abundance. She goes on to explain that material poverty is not all-encompassing. Poverty is not an identity, but an experience that has the power to shape us. So it also has the power to affect how we interact with each other. So here are 5 tips that I have for relating to people who live in poverty. First, check your assumptions. Assumptions about privileges that you have or don't. Assumptions about the privileges that others have or don't. We hear these assumptions in comments like, did you see her car or her cell phone or her clothes? She doesn't look poor to me. Well, that comment assumes access to resources when those in poverty need to dress a certain way often or need a cell phone to be able to live. Second kind of comment is, well, my dad came here as an immigrant and made something of himself, so why can't they? Well, this assumes access to privileges again, that the systems that immigrants today face are the same as the systems that immigrants 50 or 100 years ago faced. It assumes that these systems work the same for everyone. And the third comment related to that is, if they don't like being poor, they should just get a job. Well, that assumes the ability to make a living wage and ignores the disadvantages and disabilities that many people who live in poverty struggle with. The second tip I have is to acknowledge hurt. Acknowledge hurt about the ways that you hurt people, either knowingly or unknowingly, and about the systems of oppression, both past and present, that still have an effect on people's lives. We hear this in comments like, well, they're just working the system for handouts. Well, people don't like to be treated like they're deceitful, and that affects people when they hear comments like that. Or we say, they can just apply for assistance. I can't. Well, many of our systems demand that the poor or those living in poverty beg for assistance, and that's harmful. And one final comment on that is, if you are poor, you must be drunk, lazy, or an addict. Well, that comment fails to acknowledge the additional barriers that people who live in poverty face. My third tip is to recognize and honor the gifts of diversity. Research shows that diversity stirs constructive conversations and that diverse teams are more productive. And the scriptures affirm this. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so a person sharpens a friend. Another story from scripture that struck me recently was a story of Elijah and the widow of Zarephath. Elijah is being provided for by God in the desert when God tells him to go to Gentile territory, to the home of a widow who is starving to death, and to ask her to provide for his needs. It was the most unlikely of places, but that's where God asked him to go, and that's where Elijah's needs were met. Elijah had to learn how to receive gifts from the poor, and I think that's a lesson we all could use to learn. My fourth tip is seek mutuality in relationships. We are uncomfortable with poverty, so we objectify people who live in poverty and try and put them in a box. We're especially susceptible to this when we go on mission trips. So we might deny someone the opportunity to share their gifts with us. We say this in comments like, oh no, I couldn't take that from you. It's just good to help. But just because a person is in poverty doesn't mean they don't have anything to offer you. Another way that we can undermine mutuality in relationships is by trying to solve other people's problems, by giving people who live in poverty advice or prescriptions. When just because a person lives in poverty, it does not mean that they are stupid or uneducated or not intelligent. We sometimes think we know better, but we have a lot to learn from people who live in poverty about the way that systems work, because often without realizing it, we're living in privilege, and we have a lot to learn from those who are in poverty about relying on God. And my final tip is to use your power for the benefit of others. Like Peter Parker's Uncle Ben in Spider-Man once said, with great power comes great responsibility. More importantly, this is a consistent message in Scripture. We are not the saviors, we are not the kings, but we are here to serve as Christ's hands and feet. That means we must be willing to take hits for others. We must be persistent and courageous in advocating for others. It's a tension we Christians will always have to live with. Sometimes we tend toward one end of the spectrum or other, either a savior mentality or apathy. But this is our calling. And when we live into it And with the power of the Holy Spirit, we can do it well in ways that affirm, that restore, and that reflect God's love. Now I'm going to turn it over to Esteban.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Esteban Lugo, and I'm the Director of the Office of Race Relations. And whenever we conduct our workshops and our trainings, we're always asked, well, what do I say? What don't I say in order to offend people of color? And sometimes these kinds of comments or these kind of slights happen in our voice, sometimes out of ignorance, but one of the things that we do need to understand is more often than not we're shaped by the assumptions that we have, assumptions that we've grown up with about other people who are different than we are. And so in this segment, what we're going to be doing is looking at 5 racial slights that we should take care to avoid. Now, let me just say from the very beginning, as Mark pointed out, all of us make mistakes. All of us are working on our relationships, and from time to time we're going to say or do the wrong thing, and there's no one who's exempt of that. But the key thing is to learn from those mistakes that we make in our relationships and work at doing better in the relationships that we have with people. And so let's take a look at those 5 slights that we should take care to avoid. The first one is, are you here through affirmative action? And the thing that we need to think about is that statement makes assumptions that maybe people who are different than you are or people of color aren't smart enough to be in a position based on an assumption that you're only here because this affirmative action got you into this position. It forced you into this organization or this company or this institution to accept you. And the assumption that the person hearing it, wow, it makes them feel like they're less than. And so that's one of the statements that we should take care to avoid as often as we can, because it is quite offensive. The next one is, I don't see color. Now, there are a number of assumptions that are behind this one, but the first one is that you don't need to recognize the ethnicity or the color that the person has, and that is saying to the person hearing it, I don't see you. And it's not an affirming statement of the person or the character of an individual, and what it does, it takes away from the dignity of a person. We need to understand that there are a lot of things that characterize us. One of them is our ethnicity and our color. And if there's no acknowledgement of that, once again, it tends to minimize the dignity of a person. Let's go to the next statement. You don't look like you're from here. Where are you really from? I could probably give my own personal example of that question. being Puerto Rican, people make an assumption that I'm not from the U.S. And yet, the truth of the matter is, I was born and raised here in the U.S. Matter of fact, Chicago, Illinois. And the assumption behind that is, if you don't look like us, you don't belong. That's the message that we hear when that statement is made to us. And once again, it's based on our appearance, what we look like, what we sound like, the accents that sometimes we carry. And so this is one of those statements as well that can be quite offensive. Let's go to the next one. I'm not racist. I have lots of ethnic friends. Well, one of the things that we teach in our Dance of Racial Reconciliation workshop is that the sin of racism has infected all of us. And so to make a claim and saying I'm not racist and it's based on the fact that you have ethnic friends, that's not necessarily true. You can be surrounded with a lot of friends or people who are ethnically diverse and have relationships with them, but that doesn't mean that you or I don't have attitudes, internal attitudes and internal assumptions of people who are different than we are. We can have an attitude of superiority, and because of the culture and because of the assumptions that we grew up with, sometimes we're not even cognizant of those attitudes and those ways of thinking. And so, once again, check your assumptions on this. Then finally, the last one, let's not talk about race. And the assumption behind that is that race and ethnicity are not important enough to discuss in the building of relationships, especially with people who are different than we are, who come from diverse or ethnic backgrounds. And so I would suggest to you, don't be afraid to talk about ethnicity or race issues. More often than not, you will find that people, if you're sincere in your desire to engage them, they will engage in ways that will help for that mutual interaction, that mutual learning, that mutual awareness that we need in order to build and make strong relationships with one another. At this point, what I'd like to do is to have Kim put the poll that we have for this particular segment right now. And if Kim, if you can help us out with that right now. Now this gives you a multiple choice here, and so I'd like to ask you, which of the following racial slights do you personally find most offensive? And the numbers are coming in right now as we're looking at this. Okay. Okay. Let's quickly look at this. 18% said, "Are you here through affirmative action?" Another 18% said, "I don't see color." let's not talk about race. We find 9% there, almost 10%. But the one that got the most highest percentage is, you don't look like you're from here. Where are you really from? And that was at a whopping 54.5%. I want to thank you for taking that poll, and at this time, we're going to pass it on to Kate Kooyman.
All right. I think my mic is on and everything. Cool. So my part of the webinar is about gender-based remarks that can be offensive. This is a little bit of a different category because here at the Christian Reformed Church headquarters, we have an Office of Race Relations that is helping to do education on race issues and disability concerns, and Social Justice Office, which works on issues of economics and class-based stuff, but we don't have an office for gender or for women. And so I had to do a little bit of asking around about this. I know a lot of women, and there are even some women who are participating on this webinar today, and I am a woman as well. So most of what we're going to talk about today is from this very scientific research that I did to ask around, what is it that women are hearing when they go into their congregations or when they're participating in the life of their church that they feel like people maybe aren't aware is hurtful to them as women, and what do we wish the church knew more so that we could do this better and really affirm the full dignity of both genders when we are in our worshiping communities. So that's really the point of this. I had a little bit of fun when I put together my top 5, but hopefully it's not something that comes across like everybody's doing things wrong or that men really need to change the way they are speaking, but it's a way to sort of describe what a lot of women felt like maybe was going unnoticed about the way that we're doing church together. So my number one remark that I heard from lots of women was this one: is your husband babysitting tonight? I heard so many women remark about this comment that people mean it in just a sort of, well, let's have a conversation about your home life or whatever, but it has come across to so many women that there is this implication that moms are the primary caretakers and that dads are intended to not be at home taking care of children. Dads don't tend to get this same comment, is your wife babysitting tonight, when they're in an evening meeting at church, for example. And I heard from a lot of women who kind of expressed that they work really hard to model for their children a mutuality in their marriage or in the relationships that kids are observing, so that kids are growing up feeling like they understand both genders are full expression of, the image of God, but then sometimes that gets undone when they go to church and they hear stuff like this, that daddy's a babysitter and mommy is really the parent or the caretaker or the nurturer. The second thing that I heard was a lot of comments about women's appearance. So one remark to avoid would be, smile. You're too pretty to look so serious. Women talked a lot about what it was like to so often be put on the spot to talk about what they looked like, what they were wearing, their choice of shoes or accessories, but that often this command to smile or to look more appealing in some way, it sends a message that the most important thing a woman can be is pleasing or appealing, and that they really need to work hard to ensure that being pleasing and being appealing is the first thing, so that then they will be able to be heard or be taken seriously. So, one just sort of tip to avoid something like this is to try to be aware of all the ways, even with little girls, that we are leading with sort of a comment or a question about somebody's appearance. I think it's part of all of our habits. It's the way often we've been socialized to act, but there are some really hurtful and harmful things about that. Okay, number 3 is I signed you up for church nursery, and would you bring cupcakes to crafting night tonight? So this is trying to encompass a lot of what I heard from women about the church really honing in on domestic tasks or hospitality tasks or nurture, child care, that sort of thing, that these can tend to be things that only women are asked to do. And sometimes they can be things that are the only opportunities women have to serve in the church. And of course it goes without saying that women, like men, are interested in a lot of different things, a lot of different activities. So we don't want to exclude men who are interested in being nurturing to children or bringing snacks and hospitality kinds of things. And in the same way, I think trying to take care that we're not excluding women who don't have interest in these sorts of traditionally feminine or nurturing kinds of activities, and that the church life can be something that can help us to be fully who we are, and not so sort of narrowly gender-based. The fourth one is, it wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. There's a term for this sort of thing that often is talked about too in communities of color. It's called tone policing. So this idea that somebody maybe will stop listening to you because they don't like the tone that you're using to express your opinions. I think many women experience a sense of being dismissed because the emotion that they're perceived to have or the demeanor that they're communicating with doesn't feel pleasing to the person that they're talking to. And again, it sort of goes back to this idea that that can communicate that the most important thing a woman can be is pleasing, which is often not the same for men. So I think one way to avoid this is just to sort of be aware in yourself. Would I be reacting the same way if a man were saying the same thing? And that can be a kind of an inner barometer for us, like, well, maybe it is this impulse that I have to try to control somebody's tone, and that I need to actually listen to what's being said, because women, like men, like everyone, have full ranges of emotions. And then the last has to do with the language that we use. God's sons are made to worship him. And this is just a phrase that I made up to try to encompass both the language that we use for human beings and the language that we use for God. I heard from a lot of women who said, I understand that there's a theological debate and that lots of people have lots of different opinions about biblical language and whether we should change pronouns that come from the Greek, etc., etc. But when I hear exclusively male language about people, I feel excluded. Or when I only hear male pronouns for God, then it's like I get stuck when I'm worshiping. And so this is just something for churches to be aware of, that there might be women who are worshiping and who are getting stuck during a worship service because they're hearing so much language that makes them feel excluded. It's a conversation that's important to be having. Not that it means you need to change the way that you're doing things in your church, but that it might be something that's worth noticing and talking about on your worship committee or that sort of thing. So we've got a poll just to see where you guys are at within your congregation. So if you want to, Kim, throw that poll up there. I'd love to hear. What do you think when it comes to your own church community? Does your church communicate to women that they are full image bearers of God in some of these ways? So what do you think? Strongly agree or strongly disagree or something in between? So it looks like we all sort of are somewhere on the spectrum, and I think it probably depends so much on what's happening in a community at a certain time, and also depending on who you're talking to. So we're all on a journey in figuring this thing out, but that's really helpful to see that for the most part it looks like people feel pretty good about the way that they are coming around the issue of talking about women like they're full image bearers of God. So that's great. Okay, if you want to take that poll down, and I'm going to pass it over to Mark.
All right, this is Mark Stephenson once again. I'm starting my now and getting that shared. I serve the CRC as the Director of Disability Concerns and have done this for about 9 years. My wife and I have 6 children. The oldest is 28, and she was born extremely prematurely, lives with severe multiple disabilities. So we had no disability from the inside. By the way that she lives so joyfully with her disabilities. My mother also, for the last 12 years of her life before she passed away, had progressive memory loss, and we saw her becoming increasingly disabled also as a result of that. So let's think about some tips for relating to people with disabilities. The first thought that we have for you is to show respect with the words that you use. It in our language, in our culture, often uses language that minimizes people living with disabilities. For example, sometimes talk is about the disabled, and using that phrase says, in effect, everything you need to know about this whole block of people, which is about 20% of the population in North America, is the fact that these people live with disabilities. Another example, and these are often tied to people living with mental illnesses, that I've heard these phrases frequently. She is bipolar, or he is anorexic. And the trouble with that is that it identifies the person as if that's the only thing that's important about the person's life. How much better to say she lives with bipolar disorder. We would not ever think of saying she is cancerous, would we? All right, instead, a much better way to talk about disability and people who live with disabilities is people first language. So, for example, instead of saying the Down syndrome boy or just the Downs boy, we say the boy who has Down syndrome. So we talk about the person first, and then that is Down syndrome as one aspect of his life. Or she has bipolar disorder. One other phrase that I hear quite often is the phrase wheelchair bound. My daughter has to use a wheelchair, but she's not bound by her wheelchair. She uses a wheelchair, and that frees her. So respect people with the words you use about disabilities. Second, and the handout that was distributed, the People First language gives many more examples. All right, second, if you offer to help, listen for and honor the response. The idea behind this is that people make many assumptions about people who have visible disabilities. And so in an effort to be helpful, many people will just start doing things for someone else without first finding out if they would like that. So, for example, somebody might just grab a person's wheelchair and start pushing them, or start unloading groceries from the cart into the car, or finishing sentences of a person who stutters, or passing the communion plate around a person who has cerebral palsy. And what I would encourage you to do is be the student and let the person with a disability teach you. So you offer to help, but then you listen carefully and you honor what they ask for. The person who uses a wheelchair might not want to be pushed. They might rather propel the wheelchair themselves. The person who has cerebral palsy might want to be able to pass the communion plate herself. She may have to do it a little more slowly, a little differently, but she may know full well that she is safe holding that communion plate and passing it. A third way to relate in a respectful way with people with disabilities is to treat adults as adults. And the treating adults as children happens especially with people with intellectual disabilities, but also with people who use wheelchairs, and even sometimes with people with hearing or vision issues. So, for example, quite often I'll hear people talk about, say, adults who live in a group home as the kids, as if these men and women who are in their 20s or 60s are children. Sometimes people will speak with a childish tone of voice to adults. I have a friend who has cerebral palsy, and that affects her ability to move, and it affects her speech to some degree. She has a college degree. She's a talented woman, and she said she has it frequently that people baby talk to her. Hello, honey. How are you? And she said that's so hard for her because she thought, well, people don't do that with other adults her age. Why are they doing it to me? So it's really important to treat adults as adults. All right, fourth, listen, don't assume. A person with a visual impairment doesn't necessarily have a hearing impairment. My predecessor, as disability concerns, was blind, and he said that he would have it regularly, that people would say to him, people would shout at him, and then he would need to remind the person, look, I can't see well, but my hearing is just fine. Another assumption that can happen, and I just gave the example of my friend who has cerebral palsy, is that many people assume that she has an intellectual disability when that is not true at all. Or there might be an assumption that if a person is very short, they might the assumption might be, well, then they should be treated as a child in terms of getting a booster seat at a restaurant or things like that. The important principle here is to get to know people as they are, with all their gifts and talents and challenges and struggles and likes and dislikes. So listen, don't assume. And then fifth, relax and enjoy the relationship. It can be tempting to ignore someone who has a disability because you feel anxious about that person or about their disability. Maybe they have some special equipment that's unfamiliar to you. Maybe they move in a way that seems different. Maybe the way that they interact is unusual. But don't ignore people because you're afraid that you don't know what to say. There
are a lot of books that are available that could help to start some conversations about what the breadth is of opinion, about how to interpret what Scripture has to say in some of the passages that tend to be more exclusive or gender-based, that there are lots of conversations that we can have about what the Greek means and who has interpreted things in different ways. So I could put together a series of books that have been helpful to me, and I'm sure people who are teaching at seminaries would have some ideas for that too. So those are my 2 suggestions.
Okay. Thanks, Kate. And we have a question here for Esteban. Our audience member says, I am a person of color. When someone tells me they don't see color, how should I respond?
Well, you know, in our relationship building, we're supposed to be honest about things, and so my first response would be just say, be honest and say, my color is part of who I am, and so when you don't acknowledge my color or me being a person of color, you're really not acknowledging me. And it would be helpful if we're going to pursue conversation relationship that you acknowledge who I am and what I am. And so that's important. And remember, you know, God created us the way that He created us, and He created a diverse world. He didn't create a bland world or opaque world. He created this world with a diversity of colors, a diversity of people, diversity of ethnicities, and we need to acknowledge that we are all, as Mark said before, we're all image bearers. Regardless of the ethnicity or our racial background, we are all image bearers of God, and we need to respect that.
Yes, thank you. We'll take our next question. Will be for Shannon. How can churches have better conversations about privilege? I've found that the myth of I worked hard and succeeded, so why can't others do it?
That's a good question. I think that's one that's really hard to have in churches because people have strong opinions, and a lot of times I think we're so entrenched in the culture that we live in the United States or Canada that our identity sometimes can come more from that than from being followers of Jesus. And so our political opinions and how we see other people ends up getting shaped by our culture and not by Scripture. Some resources that I've found really helpful for having those conversations with other Christians are one is Church Between Borders from the Office of Social Justice of the CRC. There's also a Canadian version of that. I'm not sure what it's called. I think the Center for Public Dialogue would have access to it. Race Relations also partnered with the OSJ in creating that. And that, it's designed to be into 4 different lessons, and I think churches can choose which ones they do or if they want to do all of them, whether they want to do them in a day or over the course of several weeks. But it's a helpful way to have conversations about the reality of what it's like to immigrate to the United States, how difficult it is now compared to how it used to be. And it's a good opportunity to talk about some of the privilege that there is today as a result, right? Like, so my grandfather came back from World War II and got the VA loan to build a house and was able to get started. So when my father immigrated here, my dad was able to get a loan from him to start a business. It would be easy for people in my family to say, well, you know, my grandpa and dad worked their way up. But in actuality, there's a lot of privilege there. And when we know the stories of our family's histories, we can see that. A couple of other resources I'd recommend are there's a poverty simulation that I know is offered by Access of West Michigan. I think it's something, though, that's offered in around the U.S. and Canada that helps people understand what it's like to be homeless. And then there's the blanket exercise that's offered in the U.S. and Canada by the Christian Reformed Church, also Race Relations and Social Justice working on that to help us understand the history of how Indigenous peoples have been harmed on this continent, and helps you give a broader understanding of what struggles there still are today.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. And I just want to let our audience know a couple of our questions did seem to disappear out of our communication pod. And so if David, you asked a question about a shifting landscape, if you could send your question again, I'd appreciate it. And for now, we'll take this question from Mike. We have the opportunity to minister in a First Nations community near us. How do we work respectfully with them? And that might be a question that Esteban
Yes.
could answer.
Yes, this is a very good question. I guess the first thing that you have to do is when you're, especially when you're doing ministry attracts people. And so one of the things that you need to think about is how am I preparing my congregation for having an awareness about the people or the community that we're trying to minister with, all right? And what are the mechanisms that we're having in place in the life of our church and in the environment of our church that will help people feel welcome, all right? So that's the first thing. The other thing that you need to address is more often than not, what happens in the dominant culture is there's a mentality that people of color are people to be ministered to, not with. And so you have to address that mentality in preparation. And I'm saying these things before you actually go and minister with this First Nations community. You have to address those assumptions. You have to put the assumptions out on the table for people to talk through and to work through before, because otherwise you'll find yourself, stepping on a lot of feelings and not demonstrating the kind of respect among the people that you want to connect with. And so I would say you have to deal with some of those assumptions ahead of time. And then once you're ministering within that, once you're connecting with that particular group of people or that community, take the posture that Mark talked about. Be a learner. Don't come in with the assumption that you have all the answers, because that will definitely show a lack of respect for what these people bring to the table that we all can benefit from and grow from. Remember, if you take a posture of when you approach this community and letting them know that they help you and your ministry be more complete by their presence, by their involvement, by their gifts, it sends a message of acceptance. It sends a message of respect. It sends a message of tremendous value, mutual value. And so those are the kinds of things. I hope that I'm answering the question in a way that will be helpful for your congregation to engage.
Thanks, Esteban. For Kate, I can see how the 5 issues you raised can be offensive, but do people in the church really face sexism and misogyny?
Yes, they do. I mean, I wouldn't say that. I've never met somebody who intentionally is sexist, right? Or who intentionally is sending messages that are, hateful or disparaging of women. But I think that part of what is happening here is if we want to be in relationships with one another, then we have to allow ourselves to be seen, and we have to see other people. And so I do think that without a doubt there is sexism in the church, just like there's racism in the church and classism and ableism in the church. We are human beings, and we will always have flaws. And one of the ways that we can give grace and receive grace is to keep learning and keep approaching each other and trying to get closer to each other and to learn what it's like to walk in your shoes, and you can learn what it's like to walk in mine. So to me, to say yes, there's sexism in the church is actually a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to see each other more clearly to have our relationships be strengthened. So I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think it's an opportunity.
Okay. Thanks. And a lot of what you've shared today is just kind of a wake-up call for some of the attitudes we might have that we aren't even aware of. We're maybe not intentionally the way that we are, but we need to be participating in these kind of webinars and these kind of events so that we're more aware of the deficiencies that we have in the way that we're forming relationships and having communications with all people. I'm going to pass this last question over to Shannon. And this seems to be a constantly shifting landscape. Am I right? How can we keep up? Because I feel like I should have watched this webinar 30 years ago. Can you address how we keep pace with doing all the right things and communicating in the right way?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it is just being in relationship with people, relationships where we can share our stories with one another, with vulnerability and safety. And even just asking people, how did you experience that? Because I saw that person say that to you, and I saw you cringe a bit. I think when we're in relationships with people who are different from us, then we are able to be more sensitive to it. And I think a lot of that happens through sharing stories.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you so much, all of you. Mark has disappeared. I'm guessing he maybe got called away. I'd like to put your contact information up on the screen. Thanks to all of our audience. We have people joining us from the East Coast and Pennsylvania clear on out to Alberta, and we even had someone signed up for this webinar from Japan. I didn't have a chance to look and see if they actually joined us today, but thanks to our audience for those thought-provoking questions and letting us know that you found this communication today about the topic of communication worthwhile. And thanks to Shannon, Esteban, and Kate, and Mark for presenting this timely topic today. Hope you enjoyed yourselves. Silence. I know that Mark's done about 4 webinars, and some of the others it was their first time. So I just want to give all of you some parting information before I leave the webinar today, that as soon as the webinar ends, there's going to be a survey will pop up. We'd like to know what you thought of today's presentation, if you found it worthwhile, topics that you'd like to see in the future, and give some feedback to our presenters today. And also, if I clicked on the right slide, you can continue the discussion on the network. We'll have this webinar recording posted on the network within the next 24 hours, and if you'd like to post some comments to go along with that, start a discussion about it, you'll find it there on the network. And we thank you to all the churches who participate in ministry shares. Because of the generous donations of CRC congregations, we're able to do nearly 25% of the ministry that we do together as a denomination because of these ministry shares. So thank you to all those churches participating in that program. Our next webinar is the church's role in ending child sexual abuse. It'll be presented next Wednesday by Bonnie Nicholas and Linda Crockett. And we hope that you'll be able to, or another one in the days